people went to the streets, people died. Um,
Right.
for a whole month, there was continuous running
Right.
battles.
Right.
But if you ask yourself, is Kenya any better now than it was before? No, it's even worse. It's worse in a point whereby the same check and balances that were being pushed by this protest have not happened.
I don't think it was over romanticized. I mean, I remember even when during the protest, Ruto trying to find someone to blame because he couldn't imagine that these people have just come together on their own.
The 2026 annual conference of the Kenyan Nurses Association of America, KNAA, is happening in Baltimore from September 17th through the 19th at the Sheraton Baltimore North Hotel in Towson, Maryland. Early registration is now open at $250 until July 1st. After that, it goes up to $300. Vendor and sponsorship opportunities are also available, but space is limited. Registration details are on your screen, and the links are pinned in the comments and description below. For inquiries, call 848-224-1201 or email info@kenyannursesUSA.org. That's info@kenyannursesUSA.org. This Gen Z unity that came after those big protests in 2025, in 2024, was it over romanticized? Like now, just looking back, looking at where we are today and the questions that we're asking, like why has the movement fizzled out? Why does it seem like some of the leading voices have been, like picked up into the political groupings that Gen Z was totally against? Like was that unity maybe a bit over romanticized and the leaderlessness? Joy.
I don't think it was over romanticized. I mean, I remember even when during the protest, Ruto trying to find someone to blame because he couldn't imagine that these people have just come together on their own to organize themselves in this way. I think it was a natural rage that a lot of Kenyan people were feeling and had been feeling for many years.
Yeah.
But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that Kenya is not the first country to have a popular movement organized on the internet. I think sometimes we're like, I think the people who are actually romanticizing, I would maybe say you are the romanticizer, because the sense of disappointment in a populist movement not being able to achieve its goals when there's no ideological structure that's holding it up. The people who are disappointed in that not doing anything are actually the people who are romanticizing it. There's nowhere where an organization that has no structure, no ideological structure, can make any significant structural. I mean, it's a great symbolic moment, but in terms of actually pushing systems forward, I think even putting that much weight on such a movement, I think is kind of premature. I mean, people who it was an expression of rage, but I think true systemic change is built over time, and this is something that it is a political maturity that takes time, and it won't happen in 2 weeks.
I totally agree with that, and I want to add with that because I want to resist your characterization here, Ali. Because I know you're a student of history, Ali. The Saba Saba protests were in 1990, I believe.
Saba Saba, yes, it was, there were late 80s, it was 19, yes, that's right.
It took a year until Section 2A of the Constitution was repealed to allow for multi-party rule in Kenya. How long was it after Section 2A was repealed did we actually have a new government take power?
Okay, so let me now go back to my scholarship of history, because I tend to observe things as
I leave before you drop your
yes,
lesson.
yes.
Can I
1 minute, Mika.
interject?
Yes, 1 minute.
I wanted
Mika.
to interject something that I knew
Okay.
in your lesson. It might be helpful in that lesson.
Okay,
you
go
want to
ahead,
drop.
Mika. I'll let you talk, and then we'll
Okay.
get to history. Mika.
Thank you very much. And I want to say that I agree with the two young guests in the studio, and thank you very much for joining us. And yes, uh, but the thing is, I wouldn't turn around and I agree with you. This is something that happened out of the spur of the moment and emotion, and people went to the streets, and then there was things followed after that. Now, the difference why I would say that, and I can understand where Ali is coming by saying that this is romanticism, and him saying that, and he's not putting the whole responsibility of it into this. It's just that you you do remember when this was happening in the country. A lot of what followed after that is actually, if you compare between the time, let's say people went to the streets, people died.
Right.
For a whole month, there was continuous running
Right.
battles.
Right.
But if you ask yourself, is Kenya any better now than it was before? No, it's even worse. It's worse in a point whereby the same check and balances that were being pushed by this protest have not happened. And the difference why we can say between now and between this and what did you Saba Saba is that, as much as you say you cannot expect much from an ideology that comes out, but after that ideology comes out and it sparks into people's brains, there's supposed to be an action that follows. What has happened after the June
I'll,
4th, after this protest, is that if you look at Kenya right now, it's like a few individuals position themselves to benefit. But in terms of, if you go to the young people right now and you told them, what is the next step? What's more? What's move? What has come from all this? Like, there was a time where young people were unified, but what do you see that has come that is going to push to get a different Kenya? Is there an improve is there an improvement in civil education?
let me,
Is there an
mhm.
improvement in voter registration? So the, I can understand where both sides, you can say, okay, fine, this was just an online thing that came out and sparked this movement. But then all these movements that followed, that came out after this, what different has there been in these 2 years between? Because if you look now, it seems like people are more scattered than they were before this. Back
Okay.
to you, Ali.
Okay, thank you so much, Mika. Now, before I come back to you, Luca, like, because I do not want us to lose this historical moment. First of all, before I say anything, both of you know that I'm one of those people who was very pro Gen Z, still very
Absolutely.
pro the
Absolutely.
movement today. But I have a tendency to look at things, like after the fact and the outcomes. One area where I slightly disagree with Mika is that there are some differences, maybe not the differences that maybe we had anticipated, but there are certain differences that are there, and I think that are gonna remain forever because of that movement that came up. And this was a moment of political engagement for a group that was very highly disengaged. That is not changing, and I think that's something that maybe sometimes is understated. Each generation has had their moment of when, like, political engagement. It could have been Saba Saba, it could have been the new constitution movement, it could have been, so this was the moment that completely changed everything for younger millennials and also for Gen Zs. But as far as history is concerned, like, one stark difference, like, when we look 2 years and we're wondering, like, what happened, and we start comparing historically. Right in this studio, we interviewed the very first Kenyan political prisoner who was doing things when he was the age of like when he was 19 years old, and he was jailed back in 1968. That was Abdul Latif Abdallah. And there's certain things that he said that forced me to go back to history lessons. So if we look at Saba Saba, because that's more recent, the one big difference between Saba Saba and the Gen Z movement, there was an insistence on being leaderless, and there was good reason for that, because they did not want, like, two figures being arrested, because that's what used to happen in protests. But that insistence of being leaderless is what might have accelerated the what appears to be like disintegration. So all these other movements that came before, if you talk about Saba Saba, if you talk about those movements in the 60s, they all had very, or it was known who the leaders were, and
Sure.
and where people were going. The other thing, the second thing, because we're talking history lessons here, that I see is that, and even mistakes that even we made in the diaspora. The one interesting thing, like when you look at some of the movements, like in the 90s, even these ones that were led by Kivuda Kibwana, former, like Governor Makueni County, there was always, there was not just a protest for the sake of protesting. There was always something attached. Before the protest, there's certain answers we want from the government. We can legally compel them to respond by doing X, Y, Z. And even after the protest, there's a follow-up. When Moi was when there was diaspora protests here in the 90s against Moi, there was, his name is escaping, Maina Kiai, was a human rights activist. They were very particular. And remember those days, there was no social media, there was no WhatsApp. So it was much more difficult to organize. But I think those are some of the things that I think we can pay attention to. Of course, we do not want to necessarily copy paste, but there's certain things that I think now moving forward will be important to look to try to gel this movement back together, especially before the 2027.
So I'll tell you where I agree with you, and places where the movement needs to grow and to develop. But let me start with where I disagree, with where I take exception with the characterization. As we're talking here as friends, of course, all friends of the movement, right? The reason I bring up Saba Saba is because a year after the first Saba Saba protests, when we see Section 2A repealed and suddenly we have multi-party democracy in Kenya, so-called, I should say, multi-party democracy, it still took 10 years before there was a coherent opposition that could replace the Moi administration. He won 2 more terms after Section 2A was repealed in 1992 and 1997. It wasn't until 2002 that Mwai Kibaki took power. That is 12 years after the past protests that we saw a reform government, even if let's say a so-called reform government. Well, because they had some successes and some things, we can benefit from the lessons of history. But it took a long time for those leaders to cohere into an opposition that could completely reform the government of the day. So when we look at a organic revolution 2 years in the making, I think we have to be a little bit more
patient.
Pragmatic.
I think it's pragmatic. I think we have to. I think we should measure it by. We should measure it by the standard of history, because it takes much longer than that.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that the expectations that were born of that movement are misplaced. We should have high expectations for what we want for our government, but we have to take stock of a couple of things. Number one, the forces that this generation is going up against are working overtime to repress this movement. And there are people, hundreds of people right now who are in prison just for celebrating the anniversary, And this generation is still organizing bail funds, is still organizing to get those people out of prison. Here at 625, I'm always so impressed with the people we interact with on the ground who are doing amazing things, and we're trying to figure out how can we help you guys be more successful with what you're doing. It is a moment of great repression, and this generation is mobilizing against that. So, to your point about leaderless, tribeless, it is true that I agree that it is very difficult for a spontaneous movement to deliver that long-lasting vehicle for change. Because that's my larger point here is we have to be in it for the long game. But it's hard to do that without a vehicle that can do that. I don't think it needs a leader, but it certainly needs a vehicle. It needs an organizational structure.
So what does that vehicle look like if it's not a leader?
So I think I'll tell you what it's not first, and forgive me for answering the question this way, because I feel like we need to level set some things in the conversation. I think because there's an election so close, everyone's so eager to see. It's like now the hopes of removing the Ruto administration in an election are pinned on the Gen Z movement, right? This is no movement can be measured by one election, because like I said, we don't measure Saba Saba by 1922 or 1992 or 1997.
Yeah.
We measure its impact in the long view. No movement can be measured by one election, because it takes a lot longer than that. I told you I work in democratic politics here, and I'm telling you it is very difficult to go against a well-funded establishment.
Yeah.
You know, it has to develop structures that first of all, where we look at it as 625 is we have to interrogate those structures more deeply. It has to be something that displaces not just Ruto, but the political class that benefits from this arrangement as a whole. And that won't happen until we start to think about our country differently, think about ourselves as Kenyans differently. The way you think about Kenya has been informed by the education that this political class has invested in, to the way we've all thought about it. So many things that we talk about now, we're like, wow, I had no idea that these things were happening in our history. Not just the high watermark moments like Saba Saba, but the left-wing movements that were trying to build power, that were repressed by the Kenyatta administration, by the Moi administration. There's a long tradition of an alternative history that we've been completely disassociated from. And it is because the political class does not want us to understand how this larger structure operates. So we know that for us, it's very important to start and ask ourselves the question, how did we get here? What has happened that has brought us to this moment? It is political education of the generation that's going to deliver us out of this. It has, because we've been miseducated, so it starts with political education. After you've had a layer of political education, and it's hard work, Joy can tell you more about what 625 is doing actively to do that work of political education. It is only there from there that you can have structures that are born out of that. Structures that, every time someone's thrown in prison, we are putting together resources to try and get them out. Before you even think about an election or a political party, those are the things you have to be thinking about. It's to be able to push back even against the architecture of repression that exists right now.
Okay. Joy wants to add something.
Just to build on his point, I think, there's this idea of, the Gen Z movement failed. There's just this general feeling of failure, especially for people who are not who are maybe don't associate with the Gen Z movement, right? But I actually want to turn that around and let's look at the failures of people who are not Gen Z, because one of those failures is they've introduced a kind of sectarianism to all of this. They've separated, they say, the Gen Zs, right? And if we don't think of sectarianism, it's tribalism. What's the difference? Is it pro Gen Z or is it pro Kenya? Because Gen Zs are pro Kenya, but you find this is an observation, right? Yeah. There's a kind of othering. There's a separation. There's an othering, saying that this generation of young people are our messiahs, and let's watch them. Let's see what they do. Let's see their failures. Let's see what they'll do for this election.
Let me slowly interject.
We're all Kenyan.